Let's talk about a driver's worst nightmare. You're in an accident, the other car just speeds off, and you're left there with all the damage. So what happens then? When you finally track down the car, how does the law cut through all the finger pointing to figure out who's really responsible? Well, the answer is in this powerful legal idea we're about to get into.
I mean, just picture this exact situation. You did everything right. You even managed to get the plate number. You find out the car belongs to some company, but then the company just says, nope, not our problem. That driver works for someone else. It feels like you've hit a total dead end, right? So legally, who's actually on the hook for fixing your car?
This isn't just some made-up scenario. This exact thing happened to a man named Jose Espinas. In his case, it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in doing so, it set a huge precedent for every single driver out there on the road.
All right, so let's set the scene. It's early evening in Manila. Jose Espinas is just sitting at a red light. The light turns green, he starts to drive, and then bam, another car just slams into him and takes off. In that complete shock of a moment, Espinas had the presence of mind to do the one thing that changed everything. He got the plate number. So Espinas traces that plate number and finds out the car is registered to a company called Filcar Transport Services. He sends them a letter asking for payment for the damages. It was just under 100,000 pesos, but Filcar flat out refused to pay. And that, right there, is where the legal battle really kicks off. So here you have the two sides, drawn pretty clearly. Espinas' argument is really simple. Your company's name is on the registration, you're responsible. But Filcarde, they tried to make it complicated. They admitted, yeah, we own the car, but then they added that it was assigned to one of their executives. And the driver, well, he was that executive's personal employee. They were basically trying to create a legal firewall between the company and the person who was actually behind the wheel. Espinas wasn't about to back down, so he took Filcar to court, and his case started this slow, steady climb up the entire Philippine legal system. 3 different courts had to weigh in before we got the final answer. And you know what? At every single step, the result was exactly the same. The Metropolitan Trial Court, the Regional Trial Court, and then the Court of Appeals. They all sided with Espinas. They kept saying that for a victim on a public road, the only person they can really hold accountable is the registered owner. The courts were sending a very clear message. Your private company arrangements don't mean a thing when a stranger's car gets smashed. Now, the Court of Appeals did make one small but pretty important tweak. See, Espinas had also sued Filcar's president, Carmen Flor. The court clarified that a corporation is its own legal entity totally separate from its officers. So while the company, Filcar, was definitely liable, its president wasn't personally on the hook for the money. This really zeroed in on the company itself as the responsible party. But Filcar still didn't give up. They appealed one last time, taking this whole thing to the highest court in the land. And this is where the final, definitive rule would be laid down, clarifying once and for all who pays when a registered car is in an accident.
Okay, before we get to that final ruling, we need to quickly talk about a key legal idea. Filcar's entire defense was built on dodging something called vicarious liability. It's a rule from Article 2180 of the Civil Code, and it basically says an employer is responsible for what their employee does on the job. Filcar's argument was, hey, the driver wasn't our employee, so this rule can't possibly apply to us.
And this is where the Supreme Court just completely shut that argument down. They came out with this incredibly powerful and clear statement. Basically, in the eyes of the law and to protect the public, whoever's name is on the registration is the operator of that vehicle. And because of that, they are directly and primarily responsible. Full stop. So this is the big takeaway. The Supreme Court didn't just decide one case. It stamped its authority on a clear, simple principle for all situations like this. It's called the registered owner rule. At its heart, this rule creates a powerful legal shortcut, all for the sake of protecting the public. It just doesn't matter who actually hired the driver. As far as the victim is concerned, the law just presumes the registered owner is the employer, and that makes them vicariously liable for whatever the driver did. So why does the law even do this? It's not just about one case, right? It's about a fundamental principle of public safety. This rule basically builds a shield of protection around every single person using the road. The logic behind it is just so practical. First, it makes it super easy to know who's responsible. Just look at the registration. Second, it protects people like Espinas, who have no clue who the driver is or who they work for. Third, it guarantees there's someone you can hold accountable who can actually pay for the damage. And finally, it stops the exact kind of shell game Filcar was trying to play, preventing owners from just pointing fingers to get out of trouble.
And get this is how strong the rule is. Normally, under that Article 2018, an employer could defend themselves by proving they were really careful when they hired and supervised their employee. But the Supreme Court said that when we're talking about motor vehicles, the registered owner rule is so vital for public safety that those standard defenses, they just don't apply to the registered owner.
Now, you might be thinking, hold on, is this really fair to the person who owns the car? The law actually thought about that. While the registered owner absolutely has to pay the victim first, they're not left without options. Filcar has every right to go after the actual employer, in this case their own corporate secretary, and the driver to get reimbursed for every peso they had to pay Espinas. The rule makes sure the victim gets taken care of first, and then the other guys can sort out the final blame among themselves.
So this whole story leaves us with a really critical takeaway, one that applies to anyone who owns a car. That name on your vehicle's registration, it isn't just a title. It's a huge legal responsibility to the public. So the next time you hand your keys over to someone, it's probably worth remembering the case of Jose Espinas and asking yourself this: are you just lending out your car, or are you lending out your liability too?